True democracy is citizen-led. Politics needs an update. We demand a people's house. We demand a people's house. We are in crisis. We are in crisis. Our whole future is in jeopardy.
It's of Sir Keir Starmer arriving on stage there. A protest being taken away by stewards fairly rapidly. Dragged, indeed, by the arm and the...
It was a moment no one saw coming. Parliament shook to its core as Labour MPs did the unthinkable. They turned on their own leader, live on national television, and demanded that Keir Starmer resign. What started as a calm debate turned into a political explosion. A party once seen as a symbol of justice is now in full-blown meltdown. Starmer's leadership is hanging by a thread. Protesters are in the streets, membership cards are being burned, public trust has collapsed, and all it took was one voice, a quiet MP named Katie Lamb, to tear open the truth. And this is just the beginning.
The Home Secretary said the government would conduct 5 local inquiries into the rape gangs which have terrorised so many innocent children. Over 3 months since the government announced these local inquiries, Tom Crowther KC, a barrister invited by the Home Office to help establish them, knows almost nothing about their progress, and neither do we. Why is the framework for local inquiries now being led by ministers rather than by independent voices such as Tom Crowther? Why is the £5 million set aside for inquiries no longer being allocated but instead delivered on an opt-in basis? And what does the government intend to do about local leaders who say there is no need for an independent inquiry, like in Bradford?
No one paid much attention at first when Katie Lamb stood up. She wasn't famous, she wasn't looking flashy, but the moment she started speaking, everything changed. Her voice was calm, her tone was sharp, but her words were devastating.
The girls we are talking about, Mr. Speaker, are predominantly white. The men who preyed on them were predominantly Muslim, generally either from Pakistan or of Pakistani heritage. One of the victims from Dewsbury was told by her rapist, I quote, "We're here to fuck all the white girls and fuck the government." Will the Minister accept that, in many cases, these crimes were racially and religiously aggravated? How, without a national inquiry, can we understand what part these facts...
In just a few short minutes, Lamb unleashed a storm the Labour Party had feared for years. She spoke about something no one wanted to touch, the grooming gang scandals. Rotherham, Telford, Oxford, towns where children were abused while politicians stayed quiet.
There is no question that the state has failed these children time and again. Take the case of Anna from Bradford. Vulnerable and in residential care, at the age of 14, she made repeated reports of rape and abuse to social workers who were responsible for her. But just the following year, aged 15, she married her abuser in a traditional Islamic wedding ceremony. Far from stepping in to stop it, her social worker was aghast. The authorities then...
She didn't just mention them, she called them out, one by one, and then she turned directly to Starmer.
One of the rape gang ringleaders worked for the council. Yeah. He was employed by the council. So we know that this has happened.
Yeah, you raised that. But he was actually employed as was he in child safeguarding?
Well, he worked in
a welfare rights officer, sorry.
Yeah, he was a welfare rights officer, and then he was seconded to the local community centre. And even after he was arrested, the police didn't tell the community centre that he'd been arrested for these crimes. I mean, once you start...
This was no political speech. This was a knife to the heart of Labour's silence. But wait until you hear what happened next.
It's too simple to say that it's sectarian because, like I say, and people want desperately for me to announce that the people who were shouting at me and barracking me were Muslim men. The fact that they were men is actually quite significant to me. The fact that they were Muslim is not significant because the Muslim people in my constituency didn't behave like this. These people were idiots. They didn't do it because they were Muslim. They did it because they were idiots and they wanted something for themselves, and they used a terrible tragedy to get that.
Jess Phillips, known for championing women's rights, was sitting just a few feet away. Normally, she would leap to speak, but this time, nothing. No response, no defence, just silence. And that silence spoke louder than words, and we'll tell you why. Soon afterwards, a Conservative MP stood up. He was usually quiet, usually reserved, but not this time.
Mr. Speaker, in the general election campaign, Labour leadership promised that if we won,
we would step in and save the Grangemouth refinery, retain those jobs and invest in its future. 6 months later, this hasn't happened yet. If the refinery closes, then thousands of jobs will be lost and Scotland's national security will become massively weaker. Now that we are in power, I know that the government should use it to intervene and save the refinery jobs, protect Scotland and deliver on the promise to build Grangemouth for the future. Will the Prime Minister do that?
He looked across the chamber and said the unthinkable. He praised Katie Lamb. Then he turned to Starmer and called him, and I quote, a political imbecile for ignoring child abuse cases. He said the Labour leadership was morally bankrupt. And then he said it. Keir Starmer must resign. And boom, that's how the chamber erupted. Some Labour MPs shouted in fury, others sat frozen in disbelief. A few slammed desks, one reportedly walked out. But no one could pretend it didn't happen. The dam had burst, and it was only just beginning.
And I think the manner in which it was done, cynically slipped out, I think 45 minutes last night before the Commons went into recess effectively for the local elections campaigns, to a chamber that was semi-deserted. And many people have asked me, given my connections with Reform, well, why wasn't Reform in that chamber? I'll tell you why they weren't in that chamber, because the leader of the Reform Party and the deputy were up in Scunthorpe trying to save British Steel, which appears to be on its uppers under this government as well.
By nightfall, the internet was on fire. Party members resigned on live streams. Some burned their Labour cards. Local party offices in Manchester and Sheffield reported hundreds of resignations in hours. But the biggest bombshell came from inside Labour HQ. Leaked emails showed pure panic. One senior strategist wrote, "We need a sacrificial lamb, fast." Another questioned if Starmer could even survive the week. This is where things start getting dangerous.
This is a really important point, Mr. Speaker, because before July, there was no plan at all to support the workers at Grangemouth. Within weeks, and importantly, we announced a £100 million deal for a growth deal, and we're jointly funding Project Willow to find a viable long-term future. It is a really serious point. I take it very seriously, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that viable long-term future is there for the workers, for their communities, and all that rely on it.
Everything was about driving content. So these people weren't ashamed of the way that they were behaving. They were doing it and filming themselves, then putting it on the internet. So when Sadiq Khan came, like sort of men wearing masks, driving past, shouting, I won't say what they were saying because, it's a family show, shouting stuff about Sadiq Khan's mother. And they're not ashamed. They're putting it on the internet to incite other people.
Jess Phillips cancelled all her public events. Then word leaked she was under pressure to step down. Her carefully worded statement did nothing to calm the storm. It only made people angrier. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, a cache of documents from the Home Office hit the news. They weren't recent. They went back to when Starmer was Director of Public Prosecutions. The documents showed that abuse cases had been delayed or shelved. Why? Because of fears about community cohesion. Translation, they were worried about upsetting voters. And guess whose name appeared in those memos? You guessed it, Keir Starmer. That was the moment things really started spiralling.
Button and subscribe to our channel. Let's watch the clip.
Sarah Owen. Thank you, Prime Minister. I noted in your response to Ms Abrahams earlier the first question around wanting more disabled people to be able to work, and I think that's something that we all would like to see, that employers actually make the reasonable adjustments for people to access work. However, there are a group of people which the government's own assessments show that they are the most severely disabled group. These are people with limited capability for work-related activity. And for the future ones of those, they will be £3,000 worse off. This isn't a small group of people, this is potentially 730,000.
Because just outside the Parliament, thousands gathered with signs that read, "Why?" and "Justice for our daughters." Survivors of abuse stood shoulder to shoulder with protesters. People chanted, people cried, people demanded action. Inside Labour, it was an open revolt. Emergency meetings turned into shouting matches. MPs stormed out. Some leaked the minutes to the press. Angela Rayner reportedly reached out to trade unions to see if she had enough backing to launch a leadership bid. It wasn't just a crisis, it was a collapse. And we're just scratching the surface.
About this. It's not often something we talk about in politics, but I think it is important because it's fair to say that your proposed changes to welfare reform have caused quite a bit of stress, I think, particularly among people with disabilities and their families. I'm sure many members have had similar things, but just some samples of what's come into my inbox. I am beyond stressed with anticipation of losing money. I have £700 to live on this month. Another one, the proposed cuts to disability benefits have left me feeling full of panic about the future and extremely let down. And the last one, I feel so sick, physically sick. The whole process is horrid. Please represent me. Prime Minister, what?
Just hours later, a motion of no confidence was submitted by a cross-party group of MPs. The Labour leader, once seen as the man who could take Labour back to power, was now staring down the barrel of political destruction. But wait, it gets even more unbelievable.
Well, I think this question of how people feel and values is really important. And that's why sort of standing back from the technicalities of any changes, the guiding principles are really important, which is those people that do need support and protection should get support and protection. Those that want to bridge into work should be supported by the government to bridge into work. At the moment, my own analysis is that pretty well all of the rules make it harder for people to get into work, not easier for them to get into work. But equally, those that can work should work. And we need to just apply those principles to the work that we are doing as we go along.
Across the country, Labour's support was collapsing. Polling in working class areas showed drops of up to 30%. In some communities, trust in Labour's handling of child protection issues dropped to 9%. That's not a dip, that's a complete nosedive. In protest after protest, once loyal voters were now shouting, "You let us down." Councillors were quitting, branch offices were closing, long-time members were lamenting that this was not the party they once believed in.
Right, he wouldn't get embroiled. When you have somebody like Sir Trevor Phillips saying not only is it shameful, but it's overtly political, when you have people saying, hold on a second, the Labour Party were up against it, against the Muslim vote in many of those constituencies in the north, where Streeting, Jez Phillips nearly lost their seats, Jonathan Ashworth famously in Leicester East did. If it is that you are trading answers to young kids, young girls whose lives will be ruined forever because they have been raped by men, repeatedly raped, passed around like toys, sorry to upset you on the drive home, this is a fact. If you are trading your own party's success at the polls from that, you are a shameful human being and you should not be in power. I think it is...
And then came the whistleblower report. A former Crown Prosecution Service insider revealed that during Starmer's time as DPP, certain grooming cases were delayed or deprioritised for fear of sparking ethnic tension. Not only that, internal Labour memos showed that party officials knew addressing the scandal would be bad for optics in key voting areas. And that's where things take a wild turn.
Specifically about the people that are very unlikely to ever be able to work, the most severely disabled, of which in future there will be £3,000 worse off. And I just wanted to ask how you're working with the disabilities charities and organisations for which none of them that I can see have welcomed these plans. And I just wondered, I know that we're going through a consultation period, and I wanted to ask whether this is a consultation period on the policy itself or the impact of this policy, because I think that is very different. Will this consultation period actually alter or be able to change or perhaps bring people together on this in a way that we haven't been so far?
This wasn't just about political image anymore. This was about children, victims, families. Entire communities left to suffer in silence while those in power looked away. Human rights lawyers began speaking out. Civil cases were being drafted. Jez Phillips and 2 other senior MPs were now under formal investigation by the Parliamentary Ethics Committee. Some legal experts even began hinting at criminal charges. You won't believe what happens next.
It's also important for people who have disabilities, which means they can never work, that they're not constantly reassessed, because certainly that's something I've picked up as a constant cause of anxiety, and that's why I personally think we should be doing more protection, a premium for those that are in the most severe category and never going to be able to work, and also relieve them of the pressure of being reassessed when we know that the reassessment isn't going to make any material difference. So I do think there are things that we can do that will reform the system for the better, and certainly we need to take views into account in relation to that.
The inquiry, already announced by the Prime Minister, was expanding. Judge Elena Naina Blake, a figure known for fearlessness, was now leading the process. She would have full authority to call witnesses, examine documents, and go as deep as needed. And the public were watching everything. Tens of thousands had already joined rallies. In towns like Sheffield and Rotherham, chants of "Protect our daughters, not your careers" echoed through city squares. In Birmingham, Labour posters were ripped down and replaced with signs reading, "We want accountability."
The layers and layers of horror are almost unbelievable. But I think it is significant that it was the last day before recess. There were fewer people in Parliament. The government had insisted that they were going to give an update on this before Easter, and then it all went very quiet. Tom Crowther, Casey, who was the lawyer that they had initially said was going to lead these so-called local inquiries, spoke at the Home Affairs Select Committee last week and was pretty scathing about the interaction that he's had with the Home Office. So, exactly as you said earlier, this is not really about party politics, but it is difficult to draw any conclusion other than.
And yet, inside Labour headquarters, the chaos was getting worse. MPs stopped showing up to media events. Some deleted old posts praising Starmer. Others leaked group chats to journalists. One MP even said, "There is no message anymore, only shame." Angela Rayner was holding private meetings with donors and unions, but even she was stuck in her own scandal. Housing accusations, old comments, a damaged brand. Could she lead a renewal? Many said no. And what came next was the final blow.
Thank you, Conference.
True democracy is citizen-led. Politics needs an update. We demand a people's house. We demand a people's house. We are in crisis. We are in crisis. Our whole future is in jeopardy.
It's of Sir Keir Starmer arriving on stage there, a protest being taken away by stewards fairly rapidly, dragged indeed by the arm and the collar there. And we will wait to hear what Sir Keir responds in terms of that interruption and clearly question.
Survivor groups, the very people Labour claimed to protect, sent a direct letter to Parliament. In it, they demanded Starmer's resignation. They wrote, "We've been silent too long. We were abandoned. But we will not be silent any longer." That one sentence hit harder than any speech. Former council members were named. Some police officials were already cooperating with the inquiry. What began with whispers had now turned into a full-blown reckoning. And here's the part that nobody saw coming.
This is absolutely not a party political point, but I thought your statement in Parliament was absolutely superb. Very, very, very hard-hitting. We've been playing clips today, having to use some beeps in some of the words that you said in Parliament, and we noted that there's a Lib Dem who was present who apparently was a bit unhappy about the language, seemed to be more unhappy about the use of the F word in Parliament than the MP was about children actually being violently raped and abused by grooming gangs when no one was willing to prosecute them. But what was so significant?
Katie Lamb, the MP who started it all, wasn't taking victory laps. She refused interviews, declined television offers. In a world full of noise, spin and scripted sound bites, she became the symbol of truth, of courage, of the change people were desperate for. And by the end of this story, it all makes sense. Because this wasn't just about Starmer, neither was it just about Labour, but about a country waking up. The only question left is, will justice finally be served? Or will this become just another scandal lost in the storm? Kindly let us know your thoughts in the comments, and please like and subscribe for more.